I mean, just to use a stark example, it's kind of morbid, but if you put a pilot who's not a great pilot, who actually really wanted to be a school teacher in the cockpit of a plane, that person is much more likely to make a mistake that has huge consequences than a person who lives and breathes wanting to be a pilot. And that's also true of legislators. And so the reality is that, we have folks that will focus on short-term window dressing type solutions. Again, you can see it today in what the Fed and the Treasury are doing. We've massively increased the deficit and the debt. The United States government is now responsible for more than 50% of the GDP, which essentially makes us a quasi-communist country, socialist country at a minimum, except without any of the benefits. So you still have sky-high healthcare and exorbitantly high useless education. So it's kind of like the worst form of socialism, dummy socialism. And so, when those kinds of things are happening and they're not getting fixed and they're only getting exacerbated, I just think that if people have been hardworking with their head down, they should have an opportunity to make sure that they don't get wiped out if the government itself just continues to make a string of bad decisions that then have rising consequences. And Bitcoin, to me, is the only thing that I've seen so far that is really fundamentally uncorrelated to that decision-making process and to that decision-making body. Because at the end of the day, any other asset class, equities, debt, real estate, commodities, they're all tightly coupled to a legislative framework and an interconnectedness in the financial markets that brings together many of the governments that are sort of behaving this way. And so it's almost like a bet against the ruling class in some ways, and making sure that you have a small amount of insurance, because insurance is not something that pays off 50 cents to the dollar. Insurance is something that pays off, $1,000 to $1. You want these massive asymmetric payoffs because you want to be sure that a small amount of insurance can basically make you whole. And that's why I just think that, you should take 1% of your portfolio, put it in Bitcoin, never look at it. Don't look at the price. Don't look at anything, and hope that 1% goes to zero. Then you have the 99%. But in the case where that 99% goes to zero, that 1% will probably be worth 120%, and you'll feel like a genius.
But I guess what I'm confused about is, if you feel that the government isn't handling the coronavirus response, in terms of, handling the stimulus and dealing with the economic fallout in the best way, then why is it that you feel that this wouldn't be the moment when that uncorrelated asset would be something that people could turn to?
Look, the government has done, depending on how technical you want to get, 6 or 7 forms of quantitative easing since the great financial crisis. So we could have picked any one of those moments and said, this is Bitcoin's moment. And what I'm trying to get across to you is that, there is no seminal event. And I think that people waiting for a seminal event probably create more speculation than is healthy for Bitcoin. I think that, this is a parade of terribles. It's a bunch of small things that eventually add together, bring down the entire, way in which we think the financial infrastructure of the world works. We will lose credibility in it. There will not be a single thing, Laura, that you will be able to point to. This will be the sum of many, many bad decisions. And it's the compounding of bad decisions. And, historians will try to pinpoint an event, and I think it'll be not worth the time. I just think that this is it's a pattern. And, when you see the pattern, I think you just have to be prepared to hedge it, be on the other side of it, hope the pattern stops, because quite honestly, if your Bitcoin bet pays off, it will be cataclysmically destructive for the world. And that'll have enormous consequences to many people that we all know and care about who weren't hedged in Bitcoin. And so you almost don't want it to happen.
But you literally only can see one path to its success. You don't see any other reason for it to succeed, even in a world where not everything else comes crashing down.
Not really. I think that people could claim that it's a more frictionless payment mechanism or payment rails. I don't really buy that. I think that there are much easier to use products that eventually will become virtual payment mechanisms that connect the world, whether it's WhatsApp or the Cash App or Venmo or WePay. All of these things will eventually be threaded together in an underlying framework that'll allow seamless money transfer, zero cost, instantaneously. In a ledger that gives you a sense of security and transparency. All of these things, I think, will eventually happen. And so the use case for Bitcoin, I think, become less and less as a product and more as an instrument. And again, then you have to think about what the underlying value of the instrument is. People